Going back to our leading story today, the DA's election manifesto launched at the Union Buildings in Tshwane. We are joined by a political analyst, Thobane Zikalala, to unpack the party's 7 key priorities. Mr. Zikalala, a pleasure to have you on the program this evening. Firstly, tell us, how significant is the DA's promise to create 2 million new jobs in the context of South Africa's current economic challenges?
Greetings to you, and greetings to your viewers. I mean, in any efforts to try and solve the unemployment crisis in the country is welcome and it becomes very significant. We know in the past there's been many promises around the idea of 2 million jobs, 1 million jobs, and all other promises that have been made in the past. The significance of it, of course, it lies on the high unemployment rate that the country is facing. But the problem is that most of the reliance of these job creation plans lies at the behest or at the benevolence of private capital. And for me, that becomes a problem when we bestow such a responsibility solely on private capital, which of course we know that their objectives most of the time are not aligned to some of the objectives that government may have. I mean, a private capital has the objective or the primary objective of wealth accumulation and profit maximization, which will mean they may not have the capacity or the interest of having mass employment. Whilst on the other side, if we use government as the center of driving economic development and then opening up the economy and making sure the government invests in the economy, you have a different situation because government is not driven by the need of profit maximization. But of course, job creation and ending unemployment will always be significant when one is alive to the challenges that this country is facing, especially with regards to unemployment.
So we heard from the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, delivering his grand plan, but many may argue that we've heard similar plans before. What do you make of the address, and what are the main strengths and weaknesses that you identified from the DA's rescue plan for South Africa as outlined in their manifesto?
I mean, there are many issues that the DA proposes, and part of the solutions that it proposes, DA seems, of course, this is maybe consistent with their ideological perspective in how they look at the state and they look at the structure and the planning of the economy. I mean, if you look at their plans or their solutions around water shedding and load shedding, the DA almost insists on this idea of public-private partnerships and this idea of the unbundling of Eskom and making sure that the energy sector is diversified in such a way that new players and new competition is brought into grid. And they claim that this idea will ensure that the grid of South Africa is stabilized and what called electricity transmission and distribution is stabilized. And my problem is that maybe the problems at Eskom are not much at its generation capacity just alone. The idea of getting rid of a dominant Eskom and the state as the driver of that program means that we are almost saying we have given up on Eskom and the rescue of Eskom as it is, with its governance issues and of course with its business model. And we are now opening up this very critical sector of electricity to again private capital and privatization and the inclusion of that. Again, what we are opening up to us is private capital competition, which of course may result in the raising of prices as companies compete. But of course, any plan that seeks to stabilize South Africa's grid and make sure that electricity supply in South Africa and water supply is stabilized will always be welcome. But it's always going to be a concern when it seems that those who want to enter into state administration want to enter into a hands-off entity that does not participate at the center and meaningfully in the economy, but allows or opens a field for private capital to be the only player that plays in such a space.
Well, Thobane, as the saying goes, the devil is in the detail. Given your perspective as well, how does the DA then plan to address the issues of load shedding, the water crisis as well affecting South Africa, and also the issue of crime, considering the impact on citizens' daily lives?
I think on the two issues of the critical issues of water and electricity, the DA proposes a public-private partnership in terms of water supply and the inclusion of private players, private firms in the delivery of water, as it says, that as it correctly identifies that water is a critical resource that is needed by every economy. Also, the DA proposes this idea of a water-sensitive type of development. On ESCOM, it proposes the unbundling of ESCOM and the introduction of independent power producers, and of course the introduction of private firms so that to deal away with the monopoly that ESCOM has on the sector. Whether or not I think that is the most correct solution, we will have to wait and see. But my concern, as I've said in the past, my concern is the idea of a state that those who seek to enter into a state as the DA seeks to be in state administration. The idea of a state that is hands-off, the state that is not a critical player at the game of development and economic development. Because in that way, then you almost allow citizens to be at the mercy of private capital. And as I've said, the interest of private capital may not be perfectly aligned to the interest of what governments need to do. The duty of provision of public goods is the responsibility of government, and government cannot abdicate its duty in provision of public goods, specifically issue of public goods like water, electricity, housing, and others, and abdicate that responsibility and give it to private capital. The state must continue to play its role centrally, but of course, as you've said, the devil is in the detail, and we will have to wait and see whether the DA's plan finds resonance with the public, the electorate, and of course, as the DA participates in state administration, how this plan pans out. But I have got those little concerns.
On the issue of crime, it begs the question as to can the DA realistically deliver on their pledge to halve the rate of violent crime and also crush corruption? And if so, what strategies do they propose from what you've heard?
The issue of crime in South Africa, maybe what one would say is that the issue of crime and violent crimes and violence in South Africa is a prevalent issue because almost the current social fabric in South Africa is almost collapsed. And you have a situation where violence is now so prevalent that it is part of the fabric of this society that we live in. We will know that if we read violence properly and we treat violence properly, violence in South Africa has almost been in the fabric of how this society was created. It continues to perpetuate itself and how it is maintained. Solving violent crimes cannot be solved outside of solving the issue of violence in South Africa as a whole. Because if we are proposing an idea that says the state, that SAPS must be strengthened and things like that, we must also continue South Africa to compartmentalize what we call violence into little compartments without a very total view and a total attack and a creation of a total plan that seeks to eradicate violence in all sectors of our lives, because the manifestation and the individual manifestations and expressions of violence in individual interactions is not an isolated incident. It is part of how this society, in how it resolves this issue, and how crime has become so lucrative, and how violence has been embedded into the fabric of society. The issues of corruption, again, it's not maybe merely an issue of fixing the governance system in South Africa and state administration. It will also need to be fixed about the idea of the social ethics of South Africa, and how there is a situation where everyone seems to have this idea of wanting to accumulate as much as possible. Again, the idea of involvement of private capital and private hands and private economic interests in the state are many of the issues that you have to come to terms with, or to be able to treat as you try to put forward a plan of how corruption needs to be solved.
Let's move the conversation forward and speak about the multi-party charter. What role does this charter for South Africa play in the DA's overall vision for governance, and how does it aim to bring about political change in this country?
Of course, the 2024 elections are meant to be the most important elections post-1994. These elections, because of the possibility of coalition government coming into South Africa, will depend on how political parties are able to politically consolidate their effort in such a way that also you are also able to consolidate the vote, because the splitting of the votes we may not have a positive impact in some of the parties. I mean, the multi-party charter that the DA that has proposed with its political partners is almost following that mantra of saying, if South Africa will go into coalition, it will need a politically consolidated effort, especially as the DA seeks to unseat the governing party. It will need to have a consolidated effort because, again, if you look at how big the percentage share of the ANC in terms of its election result, you will need a consolidated effort from opposition if they're going to have any chance of being able to dismantle the majority or the dominance of the groups.
Thobane, let me thank you for your time. That's Thobane Zikalala giving us his analysis of the DA delivering their manifesto, of course, in Tshwane earlier on today.